Her nesnenin bir nedeni varsa, evrenin nedeni nedir?
Good afternoon. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. My name is Emanuel Rutten. I'm a Christian and I'm a philosopher at Free University Amsterdam. Now, in my lecture, I will propose an argument for the existence of a first cause. And then, subsequently, I will argue that the first cause is in fact properly referred to as God. So, a first cause argument. I will show that under some highly plausible conditions, atomism, that is the thesis that every composite is composed of simples, and causalism, which is the thesis that every object is either a cause or has a cause, together imply the existence of a first cause. It thus follows that one cannot reasonably be both an atomist and a causalist while at the same time deny that there is a first cause. And this conclusion is rather significant, not only because atomism and causalism are both highly plausible as well, but also because many atheistic scientists, naturalists, physicalists, and materialists do in fact accept atomism and causalism. Now, I developed this argument more than 10 years ago, and it is published in my book Towards a Renewed Case for Theism from 2012. So, what is the background framework of the argument? First of all, we talk about the world. The world is a collection of objects. So, everything that exists is an object, and an object is simply something that exists. Now, some objects are the cause of another object. So, we have causation. We have causation between objects, between cause and effect. Also, some objects are a part of another object. So, parthood is also a relation between two objects, the part and the whole. And then an object can be a proper part of another object, in case the former is a part of the latter, but the latter is not a part of the former. Now, an atom or a symbol is an object that does not have any proper parts, whereas a composite is an object that does have at least one proper part. Now, the sum of two objects is simply those objects taken together. It's those objects considered as a whole. It is those objects counted as one. Or in other words, the sum of two or more objects is those objects considered as a totality. Now, an object is prior to another object, or ontologically prior to the second object, just in case the second object cannot exist without the first object. So this is the background framework, okay? Let's now consider the definition of a first cause. So what is a first cause? Well, a first cause is defined as an uncost cause whose effect is ontologically prior to every other caused object. So again, a first cause is an uncost cause whose effect is ontologically prior to every other caused object. Now, from this, it follows immediately that if there is a first cause, there must be also precisely one first cause. There cannot be two or more first causes. For indeed, if there would be two first causes, then their effects would be ontologically prior to each other, which is simply impossible since no objects can be prior to each other. So if there is a first cause, there is only one unique first cause. Now, the argument has 6 premises and 1 conclusion. What I will do, I will first list and defend my premises, and then I will show that the conclusion follows logically from the premises. The first premise is the following. There are objects. Now, this premise seems to be quite evident. Surely there are objects. the claim that there are objects is so obvious that it is not even clear how to derive this claim from claims that are more evident than the claim to be argued for. So 1, there are objects. Premise 2, every composite is composed of simples. This is the premise of atomism. Now, as Quine has it, it is justified to commit ourselves to the ontology presupposed by our best scientific theories. And since a foundational level of basic building blocks is simply presupposed by the best theories of theoretical physics developed in the past few centuries or so, it is justified to commit ourselves to atomism. Moreover, in my book, I offer also a deductive a priori argument for atomism. And this argument is based on the premise that being can only originate from either composition or from a foundational level. So that on the premise that composition is ontologically neutral or harmless, and hence doesn't introduce being, there would be no being and therefore no objects without a foundational level. So therefore atomism is a quite reasonable premise. Premise number 3, every object is a cause or has a cause. This is called causalism. On this premise, something can only exist if it's part of the causal fabric of the world. Something that doesn't take part in the all-encompassing process of causation simply doesn't exist. And this is constantly confirmed by common experience and also by scientific evidence. To be is to be causally efficacious. That is to say, to be is to have causal powers or to be influenced by causal powers. So that's the causalism premise. Premise number 4, the sum of all caused simples, if not empty, is an object. Now, the caused simples taken together are a natural kind for which membership is never unclear. That is to say, the caused samples form a demarcated natural kind. So the sum of all caused simples is properly defined. And this sum is not problematic in other ways either. For the objects in the sum simply do not overlap each other. We are just aggregating concrete particulars. Hence, this sum, the sum of all caused simples, if not empty, is indeed best understood as being itself an object. Just as the sum of all water molecules in the universe, that is to say, the totality of all water molecules in the universe, is properly understood as being an object as well, namely the water of the universe, or the universe's water. So, also we have premise 4, the sum of all caused simples, if not empty, is indeed an object. Then we go to premise 5. Premise 5 has it that cause and effect are disjoint. Cause and effect do not overlap. Now, the cause here is to be understood as being the total cause of the coming into being and thus of the very existence of the effect. Now, if cause and effect would overlap, they would share a common part. So that without the effect, the cause wouldn't exist. But that's impossible, since the cause should not ontologically depend for its existence on the existence of the effect. So therefore, indeed, cause and effect are always disjoint. Now, premise 6. Every caused composite contains a caused proper part. Now, suppose all proper parts of a caused composite are uncaused. If all proper parts of a caused composite are uncaused, then the sum of the proper parts, that is to say, the totality of the proper parts taken together, or the proper parts counted as one, would also be uncost. For sums are, as I mentioned, ontologically innocent, neutral or harmless. But then, of course, the sum of all cost proper parts just is the composite. For again, sums are ontologically innocent. It thus follows that the composite isn't cost, which simply contradicts the fact that the composite is cost. Hence, the cost composite must contain a cost proper part. So now we have also established premise 6. Every cost composite must contain a cost proper part. Now I have shown to you all six premises. I will now show you how the conclusion follows from the premises. Because the argument is deductively valid, the conclusion simply follows by necessity or logically from the premises. That is to say, if the premises are true, then the conclusion is true as well. Now, to derive the conclusion that there is a first cause from the premises, we need 5 steps. And I will explain to you each step in detail. The first step is to show that every cost composite not only contains a cost proper part, but does in fact contain a cost simple. So every cost composite contains a cost simple. Now, how to show that? Well, take any arbitrary cost composite and take the following procedure. We start with the cost composite. Now, according to premise 6, the cost composite must contain a cost proper part. Now, if this cost proper part is a simple, then we can stop, because then we have found our cost simple. But if this cost proper part is composite, then again, according to premise 6, it must have itself a cost proper part. Now, if that cost proper part is a simple, we can stop. And if that cost proper part is a composite, then according to premise 6, it must have a cost proper part. So we can continue the procedure, as you can see. We can continue the procedure, and because of premise 2, namely the premise of atomism, this procedure must come to an end. This procedure just cannot go on ad infinitum. At some point, this procedure will stop and we will have found our cost simple. So due to atomism, indeed, every cost composite must have a cost simple. Now, step 2. The sum of all cost simples is in fact an object. How to show that? The sum of all cost simples is in fact an object. Now, let M be the sum of all cost simples. According to premise 1, there is an object. Then premise 3 implies that this object is either cost or a cause. So there must be an object, and on causalism, this object must be cause, or it must itself be a cause. So in any case, there must be a caused object. Now let's call this object N. Object N is either simple or a composite. If N is simple, then surely N is a caused simple, and thus M is not empty. The sum of all caused simples in that case is not empty. If, on the other hand, N is composite, then according to step 1, N must contain a caused simple, and therefore M is not empty either. Therefore, it follows that in both cases, M, the sum of all caused simples, is not empty. So M is not empty. But then premise 4 implies that M must be an object, Because on premise 4, if the sum of all cost simples is not empty, then that sum is indeed an object. Step number 3. Object M is not a cause. Now suppose for refutation that M, the sum of all cost simples, is in fact the cause of another object, say K. So M causes K. Now, according to premise 5, object M is disjoint with object K. M and K do not share a proper part because causes and effects do not overlap. So K is not a cost simple. Therefore, object K must be a cost composite. But then from step 1, it follows that K must contain a cost simple. Let's say K star. So K star is a part of M. And from this, it follows automatically that M and K do in fact share a common part, namely K star. But again, this is a contradiction because M and K must be disjoint. They are not allowed to share proper parts because one is the cause and the other is the effect. So we arrive at a contradiction. And because we arrive at a contradiction, the assumption that M is the cause of another object must be rejected. So M is not the cause of another object. So indeed, M is not a cause. M does not cause anything. Step number 4. The cause of object M is uncost. The cause of object M is uncost. Now, according to premise 3, object M must be caused because object M is itself not a cause. So on causalism, object M must be caused. Now we call object A the cause of object M. So object A causes object M. And now I have to show that object A is itself uncaused. So let's suppose for refutation that object A is in fact caused. Now, if object A is caused, it follows from premise 5 that A and M must be disjoint because, again, causes and effects do not overlap. Thus, A is not a cost simple. So object A must be a cost composite. But then again, if A is a cost composite, then based upon step 1, it simply follows that A must have a cost sample as part. Let's call that A star. So A and M share A star as a part. But that contradicts because, again, A and M must be disjoint. They do not share common parts because they are cause and effects. So again, we arrive at a contradiction, and therefore the assumption that object A is caused must be rejected. Therefore, we conclude that object A, being the cause of M, must itself be uncaused. So at this point in the derivation, we have shown that there is an object A that is the cause of object M, being the sum of all cost simples. And we have shown that object A itself is uncaused. So now, in step 5, in the final step, we are going to show that object A is in fact the first cause. Now, to show that object A is the first cause, we have to show two things. First of all, that object A is uncaused. And this we already have done. So the second thing we have to show is that the effect of A, being M of course, is ontologically prior to every other caused object. I need to show that the effect of A, being M, is ontologically prior to every other caused object. Now, to show that, let's consider an arbitrary caused object. Take object B, which is an arbitrary caused object. In that case, object B is either a caused simple or it is a caused composite. Now, step 1 implies that in either case, B must have a caused simple as part, because on step 1 we know that every caused composite has a caused simple as part. So therefore, regardless of whether B is a caused simple or a caused composite, we just now already know in either case, B must have a caused simple as part. Now, this caused simple of B, or to phrase it better, the caused simple that is a part of B is, of course, also ontologically prior to B. Because without this caused simple as part, B would not exist. So the caused simple that is part of B is ontologically prior to B. Now, since that caused simple only exists just in case M exists, because M is the sum of all caused simples, it immediately follows that M is also ontologically prior to B. So M is ontologically prior to B. B is, in that case, an arbitrary caused object. So M is ontologically prior to any arbitrary caused object. And that was precisely what we had to show. Namely, that the effect of A, being M, is indeed ontologically prior to each and other caused object. Therefore, it now follows that A, our object A, is a first cause. Now, as mentioned, if there is a first cause, then there must be exactly one first cause. So what we have now established is that object A is the unique ultimate origin of the world. We have found our first cause. There must be an ultimate unique origin of the world. And this origin is such that it is itself uncaused, and it is such that its effect is ontologically prior to every other caused object in the world. So A is absolutely properly, adequately referred to as the ultimate ground of reality. Now, in my final part, I will show to you that this ultimate origin of the world, object A, is in fact a free conscious being. So, how to show that? Well, the ultimate origin of the world is either information, like the Platonist belief, matter, like the materialist belief, or it is mind, like the theists believe. So there are three options. The first cause of the world is either information, matter, or mind. Now let's consider together which properties an ultimate origin of the world necessarily must have. I believe there are 4 properties any candidate for an ultimate origin of the world must have. The first is the following. The origin of the world must be causally efficacious and must be causally active. Secondly, the origin of the world ontologically depend on anything else. It must be maximally independent because it is the origin of the world. So it cannot ontologically depend on anything else. Therefore, it must be radically free. Thirdly, the origin of the world must be simple. It cannot be complex. it cannot be a composite. It must be a simple. Why? Well, because every multiplicity is ontologically grounded in a more fundamental unity. And since every multiplicity is ontologically grounded in a more fundamental unity, the origin of the world must be a simple and not be a complex. Fourthly and finally, the origin of the world cannot resemble a structure that allows for all kinds of obvious alternatives, because otherwise, immediately, the unanswerable question arises as to why one of these alternatives is not the origin. So these are the four properties any ultimate origin candidate must satisfy. Now, it is quite easy to see that information and matter simply do not satisfy these properties. Information and matter simply fall out. For example, information is not causally efficacious. Information is not actively creative. Or, for example, matter is never a simple. Matter is always a composite, a compound, a complex. Moreover, both information and matter allow for all kinds of obvious alternatives, whereas this doesn't apply to the third category, mind. So only a radically free conscious being, mind, only such a being meets all conditions. So that the ultimate origin of the world, the first cause of reality, object A, is not matter nor information, but it is in fact a free conscious being. And such a being is reasonably referred to as God. If the first cause of nature, if the first cause of reality is uncost and is the cause of every caused object, or at least is such that its effect is ontologically prior to every caused object, and if it is also free, and if it is also a conscious being, a subject, a conscious being, then surely such a source, such an origin is properly referred to as God. Therefore, it follows ultimately that God exists.